Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this third live session for Make a Marketing Plan on Digital Business Academy. My name is Jaideep Prabhu. I'm a professor of marketing here at Cambridge Judge Business School. I'm joined in the studio by my colleague Joe Mills and from London by Richie Mehta. Joe, would you like to say a bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Jaideep. And a warm welcome from me too to everyone tuning in. My name's Joe Mills. I do two things here at the Judge Business School. Firstly, I'm Deputy Director of our Centre for Entrepreneurial Learning, where over the last 10, 12 years or so we've been spreading the spirit of enterprise around Cambridge and beyond. But I'm also the Programme Director for our Postgraduate Diploma in Entrepreneurship too. Richie, over to you.
Thanks, Joe, and welcome everyone to week 3. My name is Richie Mehta. I run a CRM marketing agency called Marketing Lounge CRM. I've been an entrepreneur for about 9 months now, having had a corporate career in banking and insurance for the last 7 years prior to that. And we work with a variety of institutions, both in the financial services sector as well as education, to solve some of the most complex CRM marketing challenges. Back to you guys in the studio.
Thanks, Richie. So before we get started with this week's session, let me just recap where we are in the course. So we're into week 3. In week 1, we talked about the role of marketing in a business. We talked about things like the marketing concept and how you put that into practice. Week 2, we talked about the core of this course, which is make a marketing plan. We talked about the 3 steps in a marketing plan: segmenting markets, choosing your target segment or segments to pursue, and then positioning your offering for your target segment so that you're seen as being a preferred option relative to competitors. We talked about the perceptual map as well as a way to do all this. This week, we're evaluating marketing plans. Either before you start implementing or while you're implementing a plan, it's a good idea to look at how it's meeting your organizational objectives. And typically we do this in 2 ways: how it meets your profitability objectives, or sometimes how it's meeting your market share or sales objectives. So we looked at a number of concepts around that. If you're evaluating profitability, we've looked at types of costs and break even. In looking at response in terms of sales, we've looked at the notion of market response and how do we get bang for our buck. How do we assess the extent to which changing our investment in the product results in change in sales, changing our price, changing how we promote and where we distribute affects our sales and market share. So that's what this week is about. And at this point, I'd ask Joe to take us through the discussion, perhaps reflecting on some of the comments in the discussion threads and so forth. So
absolutely. Thank you, Jaideep. Well, actually, it was quite interesting this week. The core discussion in this week's material really focused on break-even analysis, and actually there were some great posts on that came through, and a number of different points to pick up, I think, and that I'd love to ask to yourself and also to Richie. I think the first one was all about break-even to help with decision-making in the company, and I'd very much like to pick up on a post made by Kuang Bei about break-even analysis, and he says, you know, actually our products may well be so much better than the customers, but if it doesn't make enough profit calculated by break-even analysis, we shouldn't spend our fortune into actually going into those meaningless segments of the market. And actually comparing to other methods of analysis in terms of profitability, it's quite a cheap and straightforward way to doing it. So I think, my question would be to yourself and Richie is let's explore how break-even analysis has actually been used by companies to help them decide on whether to actually continue marketing into those market segments or not. Do you have any thoughts or examples, perhaps, of how that's been done?
Yeah, but before I do that, Joe, I must remember to tell everyone that they can tweet in their comments or questions using hashtag DBA Live. So please do send any comments or questions you have during the session, and we'll try and respond to them. Hashtag DBA Live. Coming back to your question, yeah, so that comment is a particularly useful one. Even before you go forward with your marketing plan, it's a good idea to do some kind of back-of-the-envelope calculation, because no matter how great your product is, if the market is not going to bear the cost, that is, your revenues are not going to cover your costs, then there's really no point even trying. Now, an example that comes to mind is a very Cambridge example of Arm, our biggest company, a $10 billion Cambridge company, founded by various people, including Herman Hauser, and I've heard Herman talk at many occasions about this. And it struck me that when they started, they had an option between manufacturing chips and going after people who were targeting manufacturers of consumer goods, who would then use the chips that ARM sold to them. Now that has a very high fixed cost structure, because you actually have to set up a factory and so on. So your fixed costs are very high. And in order to break even, you would need a fairly large assured market. You need some very big customers. The alternative is a licensing model where you don't manufacture. So you save on the fixed costs, and really the costs then are much lower. The cost structure is much lower, and it's more a variable cost structure. And you can then target not the manufacturers of consumer goods, but the manufacturers of chips. And of course, we know that they went down that licensing route. And because their costs were so low, they could pass on those cost savings to their buyers, and they could, in fact, sell these very cheap, sell the IP very cheap. And as a result, they got a massive footprint. And they got the adoption across so many customers around the world, including companies like Intel. And of course, then eventually their IP got into all kinds of handsets and so on. So that's one example that comes to mind. Another example that's often used is the example of so-called natural monopolies. There was a time when many sectors of the economy had such large fixed costs that the government took on the role of being the owner and the manager. And we can think of telecommunications, we can think of the postal service, defense, energy production, and so on. And the government then essentially was assured a monopoly, and it needed a monopoly in order to break even. If it was going to share the market, it wouldn't break even. Now, of course, that logic has been eroded with time, because the costs, the fixed costs of setting up a plant to generate energy, even now households can generate their own energy using solar and things like that, those costs, the minimum efficient scale has fallen. So a lot of public policy was affected by this basic idea of fixed costs and break even. And we see how it's affected the political, economic landscape of many countries around the world. I'm sure Richie, who not only worked for big companies, but has also got his own company, has something to say on about this. Richie?
Yeah, thanks very much, Adeep. I think you've raised some really interesting examples. What I'd like to do is contrast that with a bit of my own experience when considering a small startup, say agency, for example. Now, many of you guys who run, you may run your own agencies or small business. We all are very aware that one of the best ways to get into new companies and get new contracts is to be able to undercut your competition. And so a lot of the time we have an ability, because we've got a lower cost base, we can actually offer a similar product with a similar quality at a lower cost. So from that point of view, it's a really effective way we can actually gain traction in a marketplace and start to be disruptive, or start to disrupt more organized or big organizations who have a larger cost base. Now, the classic issue that you arise when you're thinking about a small business is you either go too low in a bid to try and undercost or undercut your competitors, and in which case you don't make any money from that deal as a consequence to doing that, or clearly you pitch too high, and then you can't offer a comparable service to what, say, a more established organization can do and do an enhanced quality because you have the infrastructure at an early stage. These are sort of the two dynamics and two sort of sides of the polar sides of the poles that you typically experience in a small business. And I think getting that balance right, or being able to, first of all, understanding your cost base, understanding how low you can go while still being able to make a decent margin is absolutely really important at the outset of any pitch process. So you actually have a good understanding of your own costs is absolutely critical. And moving forward from that, a lot of the time it's a balancing act between short-term and long-term. So if you feel there's a real good opportunity that you can leverage, in the short term to gain a long-term advantage, then certainly that's something you may want to compromise in the short term from a break-even perspective, and even make that first deal a loss leader, for example, in a bid to be able to then go on to win a much greater contract, which could be far more lucrative for you in the future. So it's sort of a trade-off between the two. I personally am sort of slightly more risk-averse in this area, and always feel that a deal must cost itself out. And from my point of view, I'm always looking to ensure that we can gain a reasonable margin, so we can actually invest in the future potential of the business, as opposed to always leading behind the revenue, leading behind the revenue. And we need to kind of play catch up later on. So I'm always looking for it to cost on a per deal basis. But certainly the cases where you want to be looking at it more. Jaideep, any further thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, Richie, because something you said reminded me of something else that's worth pointing out. In week 3, we talked very much about break-even analysis at a point in time.
Yeah.
But really you have net cash flows that take place over a period of time. So really what you should be doing is a kind of net present value analysis. And so that's a more sophisticated version of what we talked about in the video for week 3. And that way you take into account the dynamics. So the question is, what are revenues not today or this month or even this year, but going forward? Yeah. And equally, what are our costs going forward? And obviously, you would imagine that if all goes well, revenues start to take off. It may be slow initially, but then they take off. So you have to try and estimate that. And your costs, some costs could increase, other costs could go down as you get scale economies and so forth. So really, it's a non-obvious thing, and you should try out, using a spreadsheet to look at how the net present value might change, and do a sensitivity analysis and how many years it might take to break even, and then make the decision. So that's a more sophisticated version.
Absolutely, and you know what, we talk a lot more about cash flow and break-even analysis in the finance course, Master Finance for Your Business, which is another one of the courses that's available through the Digital Business Academy. So I think rather than going in too much depth about the details of that now, I think I'd like to pick up on a point, or a couple of points actually. Firstly, one about cash flow. And one thing that we talk a lot about with the entrepreneurs that come through our programs at the Centre for Entrepreneurial Learning is that there are really two key things to think about at the early stages in terms of finance. One being break-even, and obviously we're talking about that now, and there's some more to discuss on that. But the other being cash flow, because actually being able to estimate that you can achieve break-even is one thing, but actually having the cash flow to pay all your ongoing, outgoing expenses is actually another. And what you don't want to do is run out of cash before you can reach that break-even point, because that's not a good move. So I think just picking up on a couple of more posts that came in within this theme, and actually bringing up bringing together some more of those points just now on the issues of trade-off. There was another post from Teresa who talked about the need to take action, and saying that you can take action with regard to your break-even analysis by either increasing your sales or reducing costs. And she actually talks about working in a company at the moment where they're suffering a strong crisis, and the management is levering both cost reduction strategies and some actions in terms of promotions. And I'm just wondering, that might be quite difficult in terms of entrepreneurial businesses, because obviously selling more could actually mean incurring more costs in terms of marketing and promotional activity. And it's often said that, you know, if you apply discounts, actually you need to be quite careful at the level of which you're going to apply that. But as marketeers, you know, how would you balance increasing the costs of marketing and reducing costs elsewhere, you know, at that early stage of a business or for entrepreneurs? You know, I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts, Jaideep, and you, Richie, too.
Yeah, that's a tough one. That's a tough one at any time, but particularly in tough times like in a recession and so forth. And so what you see is when times get tough, companies could get into a kind of a vicious downward cycle because sales start to fall, they cut back on their spending and marketing spending, on their marketing effort, and therefore sales start to fall even further, and then before long they're out of business, and you have a cash flow problem, and lots of small businesses, even though they have great ideas, can collapse. And there's the temptation as well, if they have a product, to give deep discounts, and deep discounts could then have a very negative long-term consequence of eroding the brand. So in theory, what you should be doing in tough times and in a recession is actually to invest in building the brand, improving the product, developing an even better relationship with your customers. Now, if you have slack resources, then that's the advice. Do it. But if you don't have slack resources, what do? That's when creativity comes in. And that's when you've got to figure out ways to do more with less. And I would refer people when Harold video talks about. We're getting some feedback. Is it one of our computers? No. So Emmanuel Caro talks about it in week 3 with his business. And what I was struck about Magic Solver is, you know, one of the things they offer to their customers is to give them advice on the latest apps. And what they do is they create these new products and make them relevant by using seasonality. So they think about the time of the year, and then they create a new product that's relevant to their customers at that time of the year. It doesn't cost them anything extra to do, and it could be in tough times, it could be a recession. But because it is Christmas coming up, they use Advent calendar to do it. Because it's Halloween, they do something around Halloween, and so forth. So it's about creativity and it's about relevance. And especially in a digital world, it doesn't cost more. In fact, at this point, I might do a shameless plug of my book that's just come out with Navi Raju about frugal innovation, and where we talk about a lot of ways in which digital businesses can use digital tools and social media to do more with less and to use them creatively. But again, Richie is someone who's actually doing this.
Well, thanks, guys. And I think it's a really interesting dynamic that young entrepreneurs at early stage businesses have to deal with. And I think what I would say is the best way of almost tackling the situation is delineating sort of your marketing, your spending, and your costs. So if we talk about them in turn, the first thing I would say from a marketing point of view is you actually really need to understand what's working for you. And the way best to do that is to engage in small-scale pilots of marketing activity. So don't put your eggs in all the one basket. What I would do is develop a series of small-scale pilots based on different marketing treatments and marketing channels that you have access to. That way you're going to get a far better understanding of what's working for you in a small incremental way to begin with. What that will allow you to do is scale up capacity as well in that same to that same proportion once you go into a larger scale sort of full rollout of your marketing plan. So that way, you can balance out both the maximizing your marketing efficiency because you understand what works, and then at the same time you're doing it in such a way that you can plan for the future and you can plan for the resources you will need when you actually go in a much bigger scale. When you do that marketing activity, you know that's already working. So that's one of the things that I would say from a marketing point of view. Small-scale pilots, understand what works. Once you understand what works, you can build capacity, and then you can do the marketing activity in a bigger way. So that's the first thing from a marketing point of view, I would say. And then from a cost point of view, one of the most difficult things for early-stage startups is to actually estimate demand patterns over a period of time. it's very difficult for us to really understand when the work's going to come in and when it's not. So clearly, trying to minimize the ambiguity, getting long-term contracts is a great ask and a great win to get. Now, for young stage startups, that's not always possible. So how do you try and minimize the risks associated with fluctuating demand patterns from a cost perspective? Well, I think the answer to that is by actually being able to try and adopt the most flexible cost structures you can to be able to try and move with the peaks and troughs of the demand cycle which you're given. So one of the best ways you can do that from a resource perspective is by taking on flexible workers, for example, in the early stages of your business. So you're gaining the expertise when you need it, when the demand is there, but you don't have that cost base when it's not there. And I think one of the best ways in which you can try and account for these fluctuations in demand as and when they come.
Excellent. I think actually you've covered some points, given some excellent experience or advice on what entrepreneurs should perhaps think about. But I just wanted to pick up on a couple more posts that came in that thread, because I think there are some other great points that have been raised that we've not actually quite covered here. One was from Daniel, and he talked about break-even analysis for apps. And he said, actually for a simple app that's, actually being marketed through an app store basis, actually the marketing costs are really quite low. So really your break-even analysis or your break-even point is reached when you've actually covered your development costs. And I thought that was fascinating, really, because so many of the businesses out there these days are focused on developing apps. So maybe this isn't a problem for some businesses to worry about at all, as long as they feel they've covered their development costs in another way. They needn't worry too much about the marketing. But at the other extreme, we also had a post from Peter who said, well, actually I'm involved in asset management, and for that there's a lot of human capital and systems and registration costs and regulatory compliance things that really actually raise the level of fixed cost to a very high point. So actually that makes break-even analysis and break-even point actually a massive hurdle. So I think it's just interesting to contrast the two potential extremes really on that. One where you've got very limited costs, particularly in terms of marketing, and others where you've got such high fixed costs that actually it's going to be an enormous challenge to meet break even. Any final thoughts before we move on?
Yeah, so I think that just goes to show that costs can vary. Fixed costs, variable costs can vary. First example is very much like Emmanuel Caro,
absolutely.
And a lot of digital businesses have that kind of cost structure. So the main thing to say to people is try to find out the cost structure. Have a good understanding of the cost structure of your business, your product, that market. The fixed costs, figure out what those fixed costs are, figure out what the variable costs are, and so forth. And then once you have that understanding, then think about how you can use clever strategies to reduce those costs. And in the videos we talk about 3 strategies. One is where you can exploit economies of scale. So if you're going after the mass market, then that spreads your fixed costs out over more people, and that gives you a cost saving. The other is to just think about ways to reduce your fixed costs in the first place. And if we took the example of ARM a little earlier, where they reduce the fixed costs by simply not manufacturing but licensing, and those costs then get passed on to people who then manufacture. And the third is think about how you can reduce your variable costs. And there the way to do it is to use the latest technology you possibly can, where the efficiency is the greatest. So producing an additional unit is cheap. So that's the advice I'd give. Know your cost structure, and then think of ways you can get more with less.
Okay, so that was the some points that we picked up on the financial aspects of evaluating marketing plans. But I know in this part of the course, we've also looked at the market response and evaluating that aspect of it. And you talk about in the materials, you talk about conjoint analysis, market response theory, and A/B testing. I'm just wondering if it's worth recapping those very quickly and perhaps sharing some top tips for entrepreneurs in actually how to set about using those as part of their evaluation of their marketing plans. Be interested to hear your thoughts and examples, both Jaideep and Richie.
Yeah, so let's start with market response, because really that's an alternative to doing a profitability analysis. And that's looking at sales. And by market response, we mean how does the market respond in sales to changes in any one of your 4Ps. So adding some new feature, what does that do to sales? And given, if you know how much it's going to cost to add that new feature, is it worth adding that new feature? So what bang for your buck do you get? Or what difference in sales will result from a change in price? What change in sales will result from how you promote your product or where you distribute it? So that's what market response is in theory. And in practice, there are a number of ways in which we can actually assess that. And I think Richie was alluding to doing that kind of thing. And in the digital world in particular, it's very easy to do that. So a well-known technique in marketing to assess what is the worth or value that consumers place on various aspects of your product and your offering is to do conjoint analysis. And it's really a kind of an experimental design where, let's say you know there are 3 things that matter to your customers. Let's say it's a mobile phone or some kind of consumer electronics device. One is the color or the design. One is whether it has a feature like memory or something like that. And the third is price. You can choose profiles of the product where you vary levels on each of those. You can have a high price, a low price, you can have a color, no color, memory, feature or not. And that way you have 2 times 2 times 2, 8 profiles, and you offer consumers the choice. And you can do this in various ways. They actually choose and paying for it, or you just have them imagine and choose. And then with that data, you do a statistical analysis, and you can identify from their preferences what is the worth they place on each of these things. And if you find out from the analysis that they value the color more than they value memory, and you know that adding color is cheap versus adding a memory feature is not, then an obvious thing is use that. Now that's conjoint. Now, increasingly in the digital world, we can do very sophisticated, rigorous experiments, especially, let's say, if we have a website called A/B testing, to look at the effect of anything that's part of the web page. So, let's say you just wanted to look at the effect of color. You can do one web page, which is the same, but it's green background, and the other is the same, but it's red. And you can have one group of randomly chosen consumers see the red one and the other one see the green one. Another group see the green one, and you can look at, how many people come on the website, how long do they stay on the website, do they purchase, all these kinds of things. And you can do a very rigorous experiment, a bit like a clinical trial that the pharmaceutical industry will do, and you can do this cheaply and you get the response very quickly. And I gave the example of color, but you can do all kinds of other experiments. So that's what that's about, and I think it's a very powerful way. And I think we should ask Richie, because I know that done some of this. Richie.
Yep. Thanks, Jaideep. I think the absolutely spot on, and the advice that I would add to that is simply to ensure that businesses try and do prototypes and do in-market testing as much as possible. It's all very good at getting consumer insight when they're not actually expected to purchase the product, but it always seems like a very different kettle of fish when it comes to actually purchasing a product. The A/B testing framework is one that I've used a lot in both when I've in my client experience as well as agency experience. A typical example of that is, for example, in any of these comparison websites that we currently have, where we're able to put an incentive on, which basically some customers see versus another group where they don't actually see that incentive. And what you're able to do is then compare the different uplifts that you gain from actually having the incentive on the website versus not having that incentive. So you can gain the incremental value of having that incentive quite easily. So it's a really great way of being able to understand what different marketing movements actually work on different customers. You would want to take it one step further and then do some sort of segmentation-based analysis to understand the type of customers that are responding to these various marketing treatments as well. And that way you can then you'll get a greater sort of insight into the different needs and wants of different target audiences, and then you can offer more of those similar marketing treatments to those, to those customers that actually that are receptive to the treatments that you figure out. Back to you, Jaydeep.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Richie. I just wanted to move on a little bit to actually start to look at some of the material that's coming up in the remaining parts of the course. This is actually going to be our last one of these live sessions, sadly, but we just thought we'd take the opportunity to look ahead. And I just want to pick out some of the discussion points actually from week 4, so when we're looking at the product life cycle, because of course, obviously reaching break-even and the break-even point and achieving market share actually relies on being able to sell a product in the first place. And we talk a little bit about actually in that week in actually spreading the product and the interest of the product and actually linking with the people that are listening out there. We have a video of Seth Godin talking about aspects of that, and I just wanted to pick up on some of the discussion points that were raised by people out there about that video. And especially about spreading through the innovators. Of course, that's the first part of the life cycle, is actually reaching out to the innovators, the people that like the new things and are willing to experiment. And David actually posted a great post here where he said, if a product service idea is worth making a remark about, then it'll spread and others will become aware. And he says, really the two groups that talk most about new technology in particular are the innovators. And he also talks a little bit about Apple, and when they launch a new product, people who are interested in that technology, the innovators come and sit and listen, and they listen for 2 or 3 hours to the leaders of Apple doing the demonstrations, and then they go off and buy. So, he mentioned actually that you've got to sell to the people who are listening, and that's the real key thing. So I just wondered, for entrepreneurs, how can they best find the people that are that will listen to them, those innovators and early adopters? How can they actually hook their interest?
Yeah.
How do they go about it?
Well, that's a very important point that Seth is making, and that the student was making, because the whole adoption curve relies crucially on those innovators, people who are most likely to try out a new idea and then also spread it in society. And if you don't get them, then you don't really reach the mass market. And so they're crucial. And of course, Steve Jobs was a master of doing this. So there was he'd do these launches, and every time there was a new great product that came from Apple, it was launched first under great secrecy and so on to these experts, who then were evangelists and went out and spread. Each of them probably spread the idea to 10 other or 100 other or 1,000 other people and so forth. So that's a very important point. So how can entrepreneurs do this? Well, I think, again, if you're a digital entrepreneur, the technology helps you. These technologies, online technologies, are viral and networked by their very nature. So the costs of spreading a message are not that high. And if you reach the right node, then that node will spread it. And I guess this brings us back to creativity and relevance. So you've got to find that community of people that probably already exists online that is most relevant to your product, or your product is most relevant to. And once you've been able to reach them, hold on to them. But again, the medium of the internet and social media platforms allows you to keep that relationship going. So then you have to remain relevant to them. So again, I go back to Emmanuel Caro with Magic Solver and his Advent calendar and so on. Now, these are apps, these are games. You could attract people to you just by virtue of being in an app store. But then once they come to you, the question is, can you use analytics to guess who are the heavy users, who are the loyal users? And once you know that, how do you keep the relationship with them? And how do you keep your offering relevant? And he talks about how they keep coming up with new products around seasons and seasonality and so on. So you can bootstrap. Initially, you've got to be available in the right kinds of platforms, and people come to you, as opposed to the old world where you had to go out in search of people. And that's the old interruption-based, mass marketing. You use television and you hope something stuck. So the new world helps you do it, but it still requires you to be relevant.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Richie, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Jaideep, I think you make a really, a great point around relevancy. And clearly there's a need at the outset of any venture to create standout in the marketplace. And I think you've really highlighted some great examples of through using technology to be able to do that. So requiring standout is absolutely critical from the outset. I also think there's one more component here, though. So, and that is to ensure that you remain consistent in your product offering. And the two great examples that I've got that I always think of, the first one being Spotify. Now, it's great. There's been a lot of word of mouth, and a lot of and Spotify's gained great traction in the marketplace by having a lot of enthusiastic users and have then been able to spread the word. Now, but what consistency has enabled Spotify to do is to be able to effectively deliver on the service that the innovators have been talking about and spreading the word of. So I think that gaining that consistency in your service level is absolutely critical to ensure that your innovators are able to talk about you, but then moving on, ensure that when new customers come through because of word of mouth, that they get that same level of service. And then the other example that I think to is Pret a Manger from a service perspective. They are constantly delivering and giving you new products, but also when you walk in there, it's very easy to identify exactly what you want. You can pick out the great range of sort of foods and drinks and all that kind of stuff, and they deliver with great consistency, which gives people a lot of comfort. So I think there's a role to be had for maintaining and giving customers something that they're used to and gaining consistency, as well as constantly evolving your product range to excite and keep customers coming back. So I think that combination is absolutely critical, as well as you've already identified the standout to actually gain the innovators and get them through the door in the first place.
Thank you, Richie. And just another point, because that leads me quite nicely into it. And this is a post from Anastasia, who says, have customers seen it all before? Obviously, the consumers have loads of choices out there and not enough time, and marketing techniques, are quite often the same. So it can be quite a challenge. And she actually mentions an example that in the recent past, a lot of companies have used to get their ideas to spread through television marketing. And she talks a little bit about the cereal companies who use their advertising to get through to children, actually, who obviously enjoy breakfast cereals, and they sold more by doing that. But what happens when you get too many companies in the same niche fighting for the same customers? You have to get your customers you have to find some quite unique ways to do this before the customers just switch off because they just can't distinguish it, from all of the rest. So I just wondered what thoughts you'd give to entrepreneurs who are, maybe new on the scene with quite limited marketing budgets. What steps can they actually take to be creative about this and actually employ more creative techniques that customers will sit and listen to?
So this is where creativity comes
absolutely.
in, and we mentioned,
dig into it a bit more.
Yeah. So that's what makes marketing great. It's not just about the science of marketing and the numbers and break even and all that. That's important, but equally it's about how with the same budget can you do more. It's about doing more with less. Another shameless plug for this book, Frugal Innovation. But actually in that book, we look at ways in which, again, with new technology, companies can, with very little expense, but a creative idea, actually get more bang for their buck. And I think of two examples. Now, one is a very large company which probably has a big budget, but they did this fairly frugally, and that's Coke, where they had this campaign for customized Coke cans, where they could really use mass customization to do that. And initially, they just put out Coke cans that had the most common Australian names. They started in Australia. But then they also had a Twitter campaign. So this is social media, which is essentially free. It's not a big cost at all. And they got people to then send in names they would like added to this list, and so they engaged people. And so this is what I was talking about, that relationship that you can do online through social media, and the relevancy as well, because this got their attention. And then, they got a huge number of hits, and this product was, again, the whole campaign was very successful. It not only boosted sales, but it got much more engagement and people talking about Coke and so on. They did it in Australia, and then they brought it to the UK, and it was successful here. Another example we talk about, which is quite brilliant, is an IKEA campaign in France, where IKEA had this idea for a while, where they were encouraging people to carpool to go to IKEA, because they know that often people in the same neighborhood go, but they don't know they're going, and so they both take cars. And it's obviously it's an additional expense to the people involved, but it's also bad for the environment, and they wanted to do something for that. So they set up a website where you could actually, if you were going to IKEA, say you were going to IKEA and when you were going, and if somebody wanted to come with you, they could then sign up. That's a great idea in practice, but they found very few people were actually volunteering this information. There was nothing to drive them onto the website. So they had this campaign called the Mysterious Passenger campaign. And essentially what they did was they did a YouTube campaign which went viral and was done amusingly. So again, very cheap. No TV necessarily, broadcast advertising and so on. And basically they said that if you happen to go with the mysterious passenger, then IKEA would pay for your expenses when you got to the store.
Brilliant.
So this drove people to go on because they were, in the hope that they would actually get the mysterious passenger to come along with them. And this just took off. I mean, it was viral, and lots of people then signed on to the website, and lots of people then went with people in the neighborhood. So, that's the kind of creativity that comes in. How can you use tools, and how can you come up with something clever that doesn't need a whole lot of money, but gets people engaged and has a story behind it? And, what we're doing today is very frugal as well, using Google Hangouts, using YouTube, using ubiquitous computers and broadband.
Absolutely. Richie, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Joe. Jaydeep, some great examples there. I love the IKEA example, in fact. And the one thing, what I would do is I would almost take it back to basics in many respects, and ask or get young businesses to really try and identify an unmet need that's currently being faced in a marketplace. Because once you have an unmet need of some description, you've got a really compelling story to tell, which then helps you become more creative in these type of innovative ways that Jaydeep mentioned. And for me, one of the greatest examples, the best examples in recent years, has been that of Nutmeg.com, which is a wealth discretionary managed online business, which effectively is tapping into the need to offer wealth management services to the mass audience, but in a much more user-friendly, much more user-friendly way, which is allowing them to compete with the big financial institutions. So they deliver it more cost-effectively. They deliver it in a way that's much more easy to understand with a great interface. They tell the story that there's a need for consumers to be able to manage their money better. So they deliver a service on all these different levels in a sort of a more comprehensive way, which is wrapped around with a great sort of story about how they're meeting this untapped and unmet need. And they do some great both sort of videos online, interviews. They use PR very effectively as a great cause for actually getting some great PR in the marketplace that you can do. And also they do quite cost-effective campaigns. Things like on the London Underground, for example, is another sort of an interesting channel that they use to try and reach their target audience. So for me, create the compelling story, which comes from really tapping into an unmet need, which you can then be creative from a marketing perspective with.
Thank you, Richie. I think there was just one more point that I wanted to discussion, and that was a post by Ben who said, well, it's one thing actually spreading the initial interest, but it's another actually sustaining it. And he talked of an example where he was involved in a startup with a product that had great sort of take up on Kickstarter and other such platforms, but actually that only lasts for so long, and a couple of years later that interest has waned. How do companies keep the energy up? Being creative at the start is one thing, but how do they continue that creativity? You know, is it something that they have to do with through their marketing, or is it something through their culture? Or, you know, what is it that they do?
Yeah, and I think again that's a great question. Again, it comes back to your commitment to your customer and your willingness to engage not only with your current customers but the potential customers, because the customer space is evolving. So you can't just stick to your current customer. You've got to stick with that evolving customer and keep moving with the moving customer. Given that also the competitive landscape is changing and the technology is changing. And again, I go back to Emmanuel because he says it very well in his video. You know, it requires them to be constantly thinking about how they can be relevant and surprising and fresh to their customers, and do that by offering them new things. And in a way, this their whole app business lends itself somewhat to this because of the seasonality. So, you know, you come around to the end of the year, Christmas time, then you have apps that are themed around Christmas, and you use the Advent calendar. And you come around to Halloween, and you're similarly. So I think that's it. That's where the creativity comes in, the understanding and the commitment to your evolving customer, and then doing innovation, coming up with new products or new features of the product, or coming up with new ways in which you communicate that to your customers.
Actually, that brings us start thinking about the fifth and sixth sessions or sections of this particular course. I mean, the fifth section is all about customer decision making, and the sixth about competitors. So I just wonder whether we should spend a few minutes just picking up some key points about the way customers make decisions and the way they distinguish between your business and your offering and that of competitors. So Jaideep, what are the highlights really of parts 5 and 6 of this course?
So, as we've done so far, the heart of the course is the marketing plan, the segmentation, targeting, and positioning. This week we talked about evaluating the plan. Next week we talk about the product life cycle, which helps you think dynamically and so on. Now, the fifth week, which is consumer behavior, is really crucial because that's what informs all these things that you do. The insight into your target customer helps you to position, and then sticking with that customer base, that evolving customer base, helps you to refine your marketing plan over time. And one of the tools that we talk about in that week on consumer behavior is the consumer decision-making process, the consumer journey, if you will, which begins long before they actually purchase your product or service. It begins when they actually feel a need, unmet need, or they're dissatisfied with their current solution to the need. And then in the second stage, they go around searching for solutions and alternatives. They talk to people, they look at websites, etc. In the third stage, they actually evaluate different options. So they might choose a subset of 3 to 5 brands, and they actually think about, weighing them up, the pros and cons. Then they actually purchase it. And it doesn't stop there, because then they evaluate it post-purchase, and then they decide, should I go back and repurchase this, or was I really happy with what I got? Should I complain? Should I tell other people about it? Should I go back and think about other alternatives? So really that customer journey and understanding that customer journey for your target customer is a crucial exercise to do, and to keep doing it from time to time, because it feeds into your creativity, it feeds into refining your marketing plan, tweaking your product, and all the other P's. So that's week 5. Week 6 is about the other group of people you've got to be thinking about. So consumers are very important, but you've also got to be thinking about competitors. Because just as you're going after your consumers, so to our competitors, and you could be doing a good job, but your competitors could be doing a better job. So you've got to track competition. And one of the things we talk about in that week is that tracking competition is increasingly a difficult thing to do. In the old world, industry boundaries were pretty well defined, and you could expect your customers, and so were geographical boundaries. So you could expect your competitors to be the usual suspects. But now, boundaries between industries are breaking down, and boundaries between countries are breaking down, particularly in the digital landscape. The competition could literally come from anywhere. So you've got to be thinking about who are the obvious competitors, but who are also the non-obvious competitors. And then 2 things. One is you've got to assess them as a threat. So how are they a threat, and how would you respond? But equally, they can be an opportunity. They can set up ways for you to either partner or to differentiate yourself, sometimes in the early stages of the life cycle, having more competitors grows the whole market, and you can piggyback on the effort of others, particularly big brands. So just as with costs, it's important to understand competitors and the competitive landscape and think about how should we act given that competitors are going to act in a certain way. So that's what that final week is about.
Okay. So really, I think that just goes to show that actually marketing is quite a complex thing. There are many aspects of marketing that one needs to think about, and really the best way to do that is to think really clearly through developing a marketing plan, which is actually the task that we have to the people who want to complete the course and gain their badge for the course would need to complete. And actually, Jaideep, I found out the other day that I'm delighted that actually there's a good number of people that have already completed the course. So a real big shout out and congratulations to all those that have. But I just think we ought to perhaps spend a few minutes as we wrap up, just giving some top tips for those out there that are yet to complete on what they can do really with the material from weeks 3 to 6. To actually help develop those marketing plans. And perhaps you can comment on some of the marketing plans that have already come through as well, because there have been some great ones, I think.
Yeah, so there have been some excellent ones, which have also generated comments, and including some that have just come in today.
Yeah, fantastic.
So we'll look at them in a second, and in fact, I'd advise people who are thinking about their marketing plans to look at what others have done, and to also comment on what others have done, because that could be a great way to learn, look at what others have done and imitate. So I'd say, in terms of advice for how you can do your own marketing plan, think about, do you want to do the marketing plan for an idea of yours? It may be your existing business or one that you want to start, or do you want to do it for a business you admire, maybe a business you work for or one you'd like to work for? So think about that. And then, of course, apply the framework that we did in week 2, which is think about segmentation, targeting, positioning using the 4 Ps. You can use the perceptual map as a way to graphically represent all this. You can think about evaluating the plan, will it break even, all this kind of stuff. You can think about the customer journey, how will that inform the plan, competitors, and so forth. So those are the high points, the key learning tools or techniques you can use from the various weeks. Let me just mention a few, because there have been some excellent plans from various sectors, some of them looking at existing products like Nike and Apple and so on, some of them looking at their own startups, some of these are digital startups, and so forth. So here's one from Alexander, just came in today. My startup is an online academy that will prepare students for a career in graphic and web design and development.
Fantastic.
Using a one-on-one approach with experienced mentors. So great idea. Market is graphic and web designers. He's done this very nicely. 4 segments, the hobbyist, so he's done a profile, the hobbyist, and he even has this little quote that says, the hobbyist, I'm new to coding, I want to learn how to build my own app. The student, I'm already studying graphic and web design. The professional, I work in the tech industry. The job seeker, I'm making a complete career change. So he's got this, you can visualize. Then he has the segment profile of the targeting, the segment he wants to target. Age 25 to 30 and so on. And then, so he's going with a niche, and then he's talked about how he's going to position using the 4 Ps. He's going to have a first-class service. The price is going to be a little lower than competitors. It's going to be online, and he's going to use social media. And then he gives us a perception map. So that's just one, very nicely done, a nice market context, and very neatly explained using the framework. Maybe we'll just take another one from Andy Cox. Andy's is a marketing plan for a company developing bespoke safety-critical software development.
Wow.
The company has a workforce of 50, and it's based in the UK. Tells us the segments: government bodies, commercial organizations with a turnover of over 100 million, with a low appetite for risk, commercial organizations turning over 100 million that have a high appetite for risk. He goes on to explain. Any organization that uses IT systems. And then they're targeting several of these segments. He's sort of thinking about segments 1 and 2, and then he talks about the 4 Ps, how they're going to promote, and he does a perceptual map where one dimension is mission critical versus quick to market, the other is functional versus aesthetic. So there's some excellent marketing plans here, and for those who are working on their own, do look at some of these and also think about your own product or company you're interested in.
It strikes me actually that, and I looked also through some of the marketing plans that had already been uploaded, that actually it's quite simple, really. You know, there's a simple structure there to it to actually consolidate all your thinking and learning from the 6 weeks and the 6 sections of this course, and actually applying it to a business in quite a straightforward way. And it's almost the sort of thing, when I saw some of these, that I'd almost want to, if I was the entrepreneur behind it, I'd almost want to print out a copy and stick it above my desk so it's there as that reminder. You know, that because sometimes, you know, when you're an entrepreneur, you're doing stuff, you get stuck a little bit in the doing rather than thinking about the strategic part of your business. But actually having something like that that's quite strategic but drifts down into the tactical as well, just above your desk, to remind you of the priorities and the kinds of things you should be focusing on as an entrepreneur to really increase those sales, get the market share, make sure you run a profitable business. Yeah, I think that's quite important. So, so fantastic and well done, actually, to all of those who have done that. There's some fantastic thinking out there, and great to see people actually really taking on board the kinds of things and the messages we've been putting through this course over the last few weeks, and actually applying it to their own thing, and you know, wishing everybody the best with that.
Yes, so absolutely. We look forward to seeing more of your marketing plans. We wish you all the best with your businesses, whether they are your own businesses or those you're working for. And we shall see you online. And with that, over to Joe to say bye.
Yeah, goodbye from me, and it's been great to join you all online over the last few weeks and through these live sessions. I said this is actually going to be the last one in this particular series. We'd love to hear any thoughts and feedback and comments on these, whether you're watching them live or whether you're downloading them. You know, it's another time to watch. I know many people do that. So please do feedback your comments through the learning environment and the platform, where there's a contact email address there, and do send that to us and let us know, or tweet us as well. So it'd be great to hear that too. I think I'm also going to hand over to Richie to say goodbye as well.
Thank you very much, Joe. I hope everyone has enjoyed the course tremendously. Look forward to seeing more of some of your marketing plans. And I'll leave you with one small thought, and that is to make it tangible. Use this opportunity to really get the thinking down, make it tangible and real, then make it happen. You really use this opportunity to actually implement some of your thinking, and then evaluate and iterate as you go along. So best of luck with your businesses.
Thank you, Richie. Thank you, Joe. And it's goodbye for me, and good luck.